What I argue is that there have been essentially 4 major revolutions in military affairs over the course of the last 500 years. First, of course, was the gunpowder revolution. Then, beginning in the late 18th century, the first industrial revolution. Then, beginning in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, the second industrial revolution. And beginning around the midpoint of the 20th century, the information revolution, which is the period that we are still in today. Now, what is a revolution in military affairs? Well, this is a term of art that has been used by military institutions to denote a change not only of technology, but also new tactics, new organizational structures, new training, new doctrine, all these things coming together to fundamentally change the face of warfare. What I'd like to do today is to walk you through these 4 revolutions in military affairs, talk about how they've changed the world, and to illustrate what they have meant for the world by talking to you about a series of battles. Success in geopolitics, often survival itself for these nations, has required taking advantage of these revolutions in military affairs, and countries that failed to adapt, countries that failed to innovate, have paid a heavy price in lost power and sometimes in lost freedom and independence because they could not harness the latest version of military technology. So with that introduction, let's jump into our lectures and start talking about the first revolution in military affairs, the gunpowder revolution. Now, the changes that were wrought in the world by the introduction of gunpowder were beyond dramatic. Just to give you a snapshot of what happened, in 1450, Europe controlled just 15% of the world. Countries like India and China, non-European states, were much more powerful than the countries of Europe. Yet by 1800, Europeans controlled about 35% of the world, and by 1914, Europeans controlled 84% of the world. Almost the entire world was westernized. Now, how did that happen? There were certainly a lot of factors at play having to do with Western success in harnessing science and technology. But what was especially important was the Western success in harnessing military technology, because it was this military technology that fundamentally allowed the nations of Europe to spread around the world and to conquer almost every other nation or tribe that they met. Now, up until 1450 or so, one of the most powerful forces in the world were the Mongols, who overran much of Asia. They created one of the greatest empires in history. But the Mongols were tremendous horsemen. They were warriors par excellence. But they were not technocrats. They were not technicians. They could not make guns. And therefore, they could not adapt to the coming of gunpowder weapons. Essentially, the rise of gunpowder technology meant the end of the Mongol Empire. Now, gunpowder itself was a Chinese invention. It was made in China around the 9th century AD. But it was really harnessed in the West. And this is one of the tragedies for China in its history, that it could not take military advantage of its own invention, gunpowder. That helps to account for why Chinese power after 1500 went into eclipse and the nations of Europe started to rise by comparison. Gunpowder was first introduced into Europe around the year 1267. Initially, it had been used for firecrackers and basically just as a form of entertainment. But by 1326, Europeans had figured out how to harness this gunpowder technology in order to make guns. Now, Europeans were certainly not alone in taking advantage of gunpowder. Many other powers around the world were able to do so, including Mughal India, Persia, Choson Korea, Ottoman Turkey, Tokugawa Japan. All of those global powers were able to take advantage of gunpowder technology. Among them, of course, one of the most spectacular early results of gunpowder technology was the fall of the Byzantine Empire in 1453. Constantinople was besieged by the Ottomans, and the Ottomans had in their employ Hungarians who made guns and used guns, and it was those guns that allowed the Ottomans to destroy the Byzantine Empire and essentially to end 2,000 years of Roman history and establish a new reign of power for the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East. Now, in Europe itself, cannons ended the dominance of the knightly class. They shattered the feudal order and led to the rise of strong European nation states. Up until the coming of gunpowder, Europe was divided into many tiny statelets, a feudal system where local lords had power and kings had very little. All of that began to change because those local lords sheltered behind very thick stone walls, which could provide tremendous protection against knights on horseback, but they did not provide much protection against armies armed with cannon.